Hi guys, welcome back to another Train Brave podcast. I'm Reenie McGregor.
And I'm Chris Hendy.
And today, guys, we have got a really special guest. So I'm actually going to be flying solo because we are going to be talking to Polly, which means Chris is on daddy duty and is going to take George for a walk so that Polly and I can talk uninterrupted. Although we don't mind having George here, do we? Really?
No, but I think it just make it a bit more of an easier podcast if we just get George out of the picture just for next bit.
He'll probably try and eat the microphone as well.
So I'll see you soon, guys. Have a good podcast.
Have a lovely walk. Hi, Polly.
Hi.
Thank you so much for doing this because I appreciate that it's not the most easy conversations to have, but I know from us talking a lot, you have always been really keen to get your story out to help as many people as possible moving forward. And the lovely thing about your story is that we do have a really fantastic ending as such so far, and it's not to finish, but so far. So I'm gonna take you, I guess, on a little bit of a journey. I want to take you right back to you being a teenager, really get to know what Polly the teenager was like, and then how she moved through how she moved through uni, and then obviously they will get into when you went to Australia and kind of how things changed for you as you became a pro athlete, and then obviously your whole experience with Reds, which you didn't know you had until a much later date. So I mean, feel free to kind of let me know exactly, tell me whatever you want, but obviously I'll try and guide us through so we have a nice journey through your experience.
Sure.
So take me back to Polly the teenager. What were you like, Polly, as a teenager?
Probably shouldn't ask my parents that. They might have a different answer. No, I think in terms of sport growing up, I've been sporty my whole life. So I was lucky enough, my parents kind of got us involved with everything, let us try a bit of everything. I grew up initially riding horses or ponies back then because I was a bit smaller, so that both my parents were very horsey, and kind of grew up riding. That was my main thing for probably the first 18 years of my life. Through the pony club, I went into to triathlon, which is the shooting, swimming, riding and running. And that kind of transitioned onto the modern pentathlon, so added the fencing to that later on. So I've been, had a great childhood, and kind of always been active.
So tell me about your we'll start with your sort of menstrual history as such. So what can you remember what age you were when your periods actually started?
I actually can't remember. I wasn't early, but I wasn't one of the last, so I think probably in the middle, maybe 14, maybe. I'm not sure. I honestly can't remember, so I'm plucking that number out of thin air. So
and as far as you can remember, they were kind of fairly normal.
I was quite lucky. I think I had quite light periods, as in it didn't really affect me. The first time I lost my period was I was actually doing pentathlon at the time, and I think I just increased the volume, and I didn't really think much of it at the time, and I don't think I told anyone, and it was maybe for a couple of months, but then it came back, and then it wasn't until I went on the pill, which was that was when I met Chris, so 12 years ago.
Okay, so you had fairly normal periods-ish, fairly regular, and you had a couple of blips with, now you can look back and see related to training load, and then you went on the pill when you were 20-ish.
Yes, about 20. So I was at university, and just kind of normal contraceptive thing that they put you on. Went to the doctor, and she kind of just said, here we go.
And tell me a little bit about your relationship with food at the time. Like, obviously you've been really sporty, so I'm assuming, and your periods were normal generally, so I'm assuming that there were no issues with food, you were quite happy to eat. No
love.
problem.
I've always loved food. You know, my mum's a great cook. My brother's actually a chef. And you know, just always had kind of an abundance of food, and you know, just been really lucky. And never kind of had issues with it. That I knew of. So yeah, I mean, I was always growing up. I was quite skinny, but I think that was purely because I was very active. But I as far as I remember, I just ate, you know, anything and everything kind of thing. No issues at all, really. So
and so your relationship with your body and everything was completely fine. You've always been quite slim. Were there any changes to that? Like, did you notice that, like, I know when I, like, not me personally, but I know a lot of friends when they went to uni, we all start drinking a little bit more, and we maybe don't do quite as much exercise to start with because we're kind of working out, you know, where we fit in, I guess.
yeah,
Did you
totally.
find that you had any changes at any point, or did you continue to be sporty throughout uni as well?
I did. I continued to be sporty, but I think the addition of alcohol that I hadn't had in such kind of consistent times. I think that obviously just naturally, you know, the calories in were more, and there were different calories, and you know, I was training and trying to balance that kind of whole finding myself at uni, and you know, I was trying to keep up with the pentathlon, but I quickly realized that with the shooting and the fencing being such technical disciplines, that I was having to travel to do those, and it was just, you know, I'd have to travel an hour away from uni and on my own, and kind of, you know, I just thought, no, I'll just cut it back. And then I actually I probably concentrated on the running through uni. So I went to Chichester, joined the running club there, and had an amazing few years with them. So yeah, really loved my running. I've always been a runner, I think, more than anything.
Okay, cool. And so so you went on the pill,
Yeah.
and no issues with the pill, like you had your monthly withdrawal bleed, everything was fine?
No, so I was on a pill that I just went straight through.
Okay.
So I never had a withdrawal bleed. It was just I guess it was a pill that you take on, you know, when you can't. I did have, I had to change once because I started getting kind of the blurred vision, migraine auras. So, you know, kind of, but they didn't know that was linked to the pill, but I think it's a precaution with one of them. They say, okay, we're just going to change you over to the other one, but I can't remember exactly what one it was. So yeah, that's the only issue I had. And obviously I didn't know that what I've discussed with you is that's when my gut issues started.
Right, okay.
So during uni, had a lot of kind of I guess kind of runners associated problems. So lots of listeners will be familiar with those. But it got pretty bad, and it was, you know, so much so that I didn't really want to run far away from home, things like that. And went to the doctor, and she just labelled it as IBS. Didn't really literally gave me a pack of, you know, things to read. And she said, oh, it might get better. And she actually even said, it'll probably get better when you get pregnant. And bearing in mind, I was like 20 then, and I was like, kids weren't on the radar at all, kind of thing. And I was like, well, what? So I have to put up with this for that long? And then really it was a process of eliminate. I kind of went down the road of, okay, I've got to do a process of elimination. What's causing this irritable bowel syndrome? So you know, started cutting out things. Yeah. So
would you say that, like, because interestingly, often the gut issues, I mean, obviously the pill can cause gut issues, and the thing about the pill as well is that it what people don't realize is that certain pills, usually well, both pills, but particularly the combined pill, which is not the one you were on because you would have had a break if you'd been on that one, but they also stop the absorption of really key nutrients, and so that can also then start to affect the gut microbiome in general. So So at this stage, you just gone on the pill, you'd met Chris, you were running, you had some stomach issues, but you weren't really noticing anything else as such. You weren't you were still like you were drinking and you were eating, and you kind of just very, very sort of normal teenage, well, I say teenage, young adult behavior, to be fair.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So talk me through like the next few years, because obviously at some point you stepped up, right? Because you ended up going into sort of professional sport a lot more, and so things stepped up for you. So talk us through that process of how that happened, and like, you know, what did that look like for you, and how did that feel to you, like in terms of moving up to that level?
So we after I finished uni, I kind of got involved in triathlon. And at an age group level, I just started this, sprint distance. Actually, completely skipped out Olympic distance. I've never done Olympic distance triathlon, and was pretty good in age group, and really loved it. And I don't think Chris says we moved to Australia to see how good I can get, but how good I could have got, but I don't think we went for that reason. It was just that was a bonus that the training over there would let me kind of see how good we could get. So yeah, we went over to Australia, did about 6 months of traveling, and then ended up in Byron Bay and got in with a really good squad over there, with a really good coach and some very, very decent athletes, like some of the best in the world. And I was still, I was kind of just keeping fit and dabbling in it. And then my coach said, oh, I think you should go long course because of my run. My run strength, I would, be able to catch up, chase people down at the end of the end. So I went into the long course, and for a couple of years had some really good results age group. In hindsight, I think I made the step up too early to be professional, but hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? And I was, even though I was professional, I say it very loosely because I believe there's a couple of levels to a professional, and I was a rookie, but I have no regrets. Like I always say, I have no regrets. Like if I hadn't have stepped up, I would have always wondered what if. So I'm really pleased, and I got to start against some of the most amazing women in the sport, and learned a lot. But then 2015, I just had enough. Like I was losing the love of it. I was putting far too much pressure on myself. I was a very I'd always compare myself, be scrolling through the results of other races and who I'm up against and things like that. And I was just really in it for the wrong reason, I think. And I knew that to get to where I wanted to get to, or to potentially, reach my potential, would be another 5-10 years. And to be honest, it wasn't I wasn't bothered, but I knew it was going to be a long road. And for me personally, that didn't fulfill me. So I knew that I wanted to start a family, and even though I was still quite young, obviously that was on my mind. And Chris was working hard to kind of keep us both afloat, and I was waitressing alongside the training, but I just felt that guilt of not kind of contributing as much, in it, all the financial pressure being on him. So yeah, for me personally, it wasn't enough, and I knew that I didn't want to commit the next 5-10 years doing it.
So let's talk a little bit about that time just before 2015, when you made the decision, actually, do you know what, enough's enough, and you sort of lost the love.
Yeah.
I get that. Like I've definitely gone through phases of that with my running, where I've just, in fact, mine was around 2015 as well. I'd done an awful lot, and then I actually started to feel quite unwell, and that was what made me stop. And for me, mine was then, later diagnosed as the sarcoidosis, which is the autoimmune condition, which I think in hindsight is probably due to the fact that I'd massively overtrained and didn't really rest enough. And although I've always been very fortunate since doing sport as such, because I didn't really do sport. I've always been sporty, but until I started taking it seriously, I suppose, as a competitive runner, I've never lost my period during that time. So I've always been very, very fortunate in that I've obviously managed to keep balance going. But that doesn't mean that you are not necessarily in reds, right? Because for me, it ended up being an autoimmune issue. So yeah, we all go through those phases, I think, where we fall out of love with things. But I'd like to know a little bit more about the pressure that you maybe started to feel and notice in that lead up to that point. Because I remember when Chris and I were doing the podcast, when we started back in February, and we did the personal story, one of the things that I asked him was like, and he couldn't necessarily answer for you, but I said to him, do you think that Polly was consciously trying to control her intake to achieve like a body composition? And he really didn't know. He really, because at the end of the day, the only person who could ever really answer that is the person who's going through it, right? So he could see changes in you, which he observed, and he obviously discussed with you. And you know, I think obviously you two have such a great teamwork relationship, which is fantastic. And it's you know, you support each other so much, and I see that daily when we're in the practice together. But I just wonder, like, for you, when did you maybe start to notice that perhaps some of your thoughts were not quite as rational or as clear as they were previously?
It's actually a really hard question for me to answer as well. And I don't think that I really understood it until now. So I like what you said actually about you actually started to feel unhealthy, and I did. When I gave up in 2015, I was at that point. You know, people think, oh, you're at your fittest, you must be so healthy, and I was like, nope, I think I feel like I've tipped over. But going back a few years, it was actually started when we were back in the UK, so before we went to Australia. I think I've been quite lucky in that, you know, people said, oh, I always had a high metabolism, you know, I've been able to eat whatever I want and just, you know, be normal in commas. But I think with the whole, I think maybe the IBS kind of kicked it off. And I do very, very clearly remember the summer before we went to Australia. So this was 2012, I think. And we were both doing 3 or 4 jobs. You know, training was kind of quite casual. It was, you know, it was still training a lot, but there was no pressure competitively. But we were doing 3 or 4 jobs to try and save up for Australia. And I remember being in situations where I was in shops and I couldn't just, like, I would literally be in there for an hour and I couldn't decide what to buy. And I don't know why it was, and I kind of, it's very bitty parts of the puzzle, but I do remember just finding it really hard to make decisions about food and reading the backs of things. And there was a point in which Chris was like, you know, I think he was just fed up, and he was just like, you've got to stop this, like, you've got to pull your finger out. Because I would just give up, and I would just say, oh, I'm not hungry, like, because I just could not, my mind just couldn't process what, you know, if it was okay to eat something, you know, this or that. And I don't remember the specifics. I don't know if it was a whole, you know, kind of, oh, that's got too many carbs in it. But I remember feeling quite overwhelmed and like it was out of control for me.
So that's really interesting, because it's not something that you consciously made the decision somehow with everything else. Now, and the other thing I find really fascinating is that you're not the first person who has been told they've got IBS and then kind of goes on some sort of exclusion diet, whether that's FODMAPs or whatever. I mean, the most likely is FODMAPs, because that's what you put in IBS into the internet and you get FODMAPs coming out. And of course, that should really only be done under the supervision of somebody who's trained in FODMAPs. And it's not a lifelong diet, which a lot of people don't realize. But I have had so many, generally young women, who have been put on the FODMAP diet for IBS in inverted commas, where it's then gone down the road of, obviously it's a restrictive way of eating, but it's then caused more problems, because there's almost like, it's a bit like orthorexia, right? It becomes that kind of almost the fear associated with eating anything that might then create your symptoms. And so it becomes very ritualized. I can't do that because I need to do this. And like you said, like when you're in a shop and you just can't make a decision. I remember, I mean, obviously I was a lot younger, but I remember when I had to make decisions about choosing, I don't know, breakfast cereals or something, and I'd be like, but I don't know which one's right. And that's all you can think is, I need to get it right, because if you didn't get it right, it was like, oh, something awful might happen. You have no idea what that awful is, but something awful might happen. So,
and I think I'm a very indecisive person anyway. I would say that's me down to a T. So I think that just exasperated everything. So
okay, so obviously, so we started to see some of the, I suppose, maybe in a slightly not conscious way, you started restricting your intake before you went to Australia.
Yeah.
And you get to join this amazing squad where you're probably not fueling your system well.
Yeah, but I don't think, again, I think it wasn't a conscious decision. I think at that point it was just that I didn't realize, I underestimated how much food I needed. You know, I used to kind of do a 4 or 5 hour ride on a banana and a latte, you know.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I know Chris has said in the past, I used to come home and, you know, he literally used to force me to eat before I fell asleep, kind of thing. In the nicest way. He didn't, you know, he was just like, you know, you need to eat something. What have you eaten today, kind of thing. So yeah, I think it was, I don't know if I was naive, but it was.
I don't think we're naive. I think many athletes, and you know, that's why we talk about voluntary and involuntary RED-S, right? Like involuntary RED-S is when somebody genuinely has no idea how much fuel they actually need for the system to do the work they need to do. Yeah. Whereas obviously voluntary RED-S is much more a conscious decision. You're very aware that you're under fueling or you're overtraining. And one, like involuntary RED-S can become voluntary in the sense that you can morph into it, because if you get to the point where you over restrict your intake to a point where then it then starts to have a psychological effect on how you think and how, you know, and how your brain functions, then obviously it then becomes much more of a learnt behavior and a voluntary need to continue with those behaviors. So I think when you and I have spoken, you sort of, that's what you've kind of think happened, is that it was all completely involuntary. You had no idea, just didn't quite hit the mark in terms of nutrition.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't even think it was a body kind of body image thing, or not that I was aware of, because I was doing so much training, I wasn't worried that I wasn't the right size. We lived in Byron Bay, which is a very attractive place. So maybe unconsciously the pressure was there. And I definitely adopted a lot of clean eating kind of beliefs. You know, I can't remember what they were. I mean, nothing was extreme, and I used to treat myself all the time, kind of thing. But there was definitely, that was a majority of my diet. Was I was conscious about how many carbs I was having. Yeah.
Okay. So we get to 2015.
Yeah.
You've had enough. You're done. Like, can you remember the exact moment when you went, I say, I am done?
Yeah, I was out on a I think it was a week before a half Ironman, and I was out on the bike just training on my own. Our squad had actually kind of broken up by then, and there was a lot of solo training, and I think that kind of didn't help. you know, you're doing a lot when you're training for a half Ironman. You know, it's not even an Ironman, and you're training a lot on your own. So yeah, I really struggled motivation wise with that. And yeah, I was out on a ride, and I just called Chris, and I was just like, I'm done. And it was really weird, but I did feel like a massive sense of relief. And I think, going back to what we were saying earlier, I think I never had a break. I literally had never, from when I was a child, I'd always been training. And it wasn't that my parents were pushy. They were super supportive. They never pushed me into anything. It was completely under my own, you know, will. But yeah, I look back and I was like, actually, I've never had a break.
Yeah, that's really.
So I think it was literally 20, you know, maybe 15 years, or I don't know, of just, you know, Polly being an athlete, kind of, that was my identity.
That was what I was going to ask you next. So obviously 2015, you decided that was it. Enough was enough. You wanted to focus on potentially knowing you could have a family, maybe not right there and then, but, you know, could have a family. So I'm assuming that you came off the pill.
Yeah, came off the pill literally then. And I don't know if I went to the doctor straight away. But I think I left it a few months. So that was kind of October time, and I left it a few months, and then nothing happened. Went to the doctor, and she was like, okay, I think we need to, you know, increase your body your BMI. They were talking about BMI kind of thing, which is, you know, really really reliable. And yeah, so I never really stopped training.
Yeah, so I was going to say to that, because I think you know, you picked up on the fact that you had an identity, and this is something that a lot of people talk to me about. Is that it's their identity. You know, I even when I have individuals that go from, like, they're runners, but they get so many injuries, they decide, right, I'll become a cyclist. But they really struggle to let go of the identity of being a runner. You know, we create these identities for ourselves, and that in itself, it has its own role. Like the very fact that we need identity usually suggests it's because we need it to prove something, to prove our place. We need that acceptance, we need that approval, you know. So obviously I can appreciate, you know, you've been Polly the athlete for 15 odd years, and suddenly Polly the athlete goes, do you know what, I'm done, except I'm not really done. So tell me about that. How did that, like, when you say you were still training, obviously, what kind of level were you training at in comparison to previously, would you say?
I'm not sure how in terms of kind of hours per week, but I think I was a bit more flexible with my training, put it that way. Like I wasn't on such a strict kind of schedule to try and fit all the training in during the week. You know, I started training a bit more in the gym. But yeah, I never, even though I wasn't racing, I was still very conscious. And I think that's where it kicked in, the whole body image thing. I was like, this is my identity. If I've lost that, I need to stay visibly who I am, you know, what people are used to, because otherwise they'll be like, oh, she's, you know, let herself go a bit. So yeah.
And that, again, that's really fascinating, right? Because again, so many people worry about the perception of others, and they have this identity. And body image is a very interesting subject, because it's very much, you know, technically speaking, if you define body image, it's the image you see of yourself on a screen or in the mirror, and it represents what you see at that moment. It doesn't represent you as such. That's the definition of a body image. But we do tend to live in a society where many of us sadly have a distorted body image, or an obsession even with our body image. And again, often when people are going in search of achieving a certain body image, it's usually because they can't get what they're looking for from anywhere else, and normally that, again, is the self-assurance and the self-acceptance. And so you'd gone from basically achieving continually as an athlete, because that's what you did. You got, you races, you did really well, great results, and in a very short period of time, really, you were continually smashing your times and stuff. And then suddenly you weren't, in your mind, probably weren't achieving, and yet you needed to, because that's who you are. That's how you get approval. That's how you feel a sense of worth, that need to achieve. And so many of us are like that. Like, that's my Achilles heel, the constant need to achieve, right? I get that.
But I think that's what makes makes us actually successful. Like it's, you need, I don't think it should be completely seen as a bad thing.
No, I think it's understanding where it becomes dysfunctional.
Exactly, yeah.
Obviously, so then in your case, then the body image kicked in because you still needed that achievement.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Like, we've had this conversation before. You have said to me this before, that even though you wanted to see if your body could function, and you went to lots of doctors, which we'll talk about in a second, you had lots of tests, and you tried to get things, and I know you went on Clomid and all sorts of stuff. You probably didn't wholeheartedly give it your complete all.
No.
Until maybe we spoke, maybe before.
It was. So when did you?
I joined the practice last April 20.
Yeah, so it was about then that I completely committed.
Yeah, because I think we spoke just before I started at the practice.
Yeah.
I'd come in and said hi to everybody. But yeah, so maybe let's talk a little bit about the different support you actually, you tried to access in Australia, and then when you came back, and I'd like to hear a little bit as well about, I know that Chris has always mentioned that you joined some of the amenorrhea groups on Facebook and stuff, even though you didn't always contribute, but you were kind of sitting there listening, which I think I'd like to hear your experience of that. I've never joined a group like that, so I'd like to hear. Well, I have, but it was for ultra runners, and actually, if I'm honest, it got to the point where I couldn't sit and listen anymore, so I left the group.
Yeah.
But I wonder, like, let's talk about the help that you got, because I know there were a couple of weird things that were said to you during that time.
So I think after the initial time I went to the doctor, she said, obviously, you need to put on a bit of weight, and yeah, I remember telling you actually a couple of months later, she was doing routine tests, so I had all my blood tests done, or ones that we thought I needed done, and a really weird thing came up about my cholesterol. So and she said, oh, your cholesterol is quite high, and I said, what, thinking it's the good cholesterol. Oh no, the bad cholesterol. And I'm thinking, what? Because my understanding up to then was that, the bad cholesterol is with people who have really poor diets and lifestyles and, overweight and things like that. And I was thinking, oh gosh, have I been eating too much butter, or, things like that. And I have a treat, but it's not, I still I'm very healthy, I thought. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was something around 9, my cholesterol. So that's very high, isn't it?
Very high,
yeah. So I was thinking, what is going on? So she actually referred me to have an ECG. So I went to the Gold Coast and went to see the cardiologist. And they obviously they couldn't find anything. I don't remember exactly what they said when we were there. Chris might remember a bit more, but Chris then by that time we had started doing our own research, because we were like, this is just ridiculous. Like, how can this be? And I had the test done a couple of times, so it wasn't an anomaly kind of thing. And they said, oh yeah, you're fine. And Chris said, oh, Polly's just been put on Clomid, because by that time I'd been to see the fertility specialist on the Gold Coast, who had put me on Clomid to try and you'll be able to tell people the official, but basically to kickstart things.
The Clomid is given to people to stimulate ovulation.
Yeah.
So, you know, if somebody, I guess they in their head, they tried everything. They felt you were, they probably what would have done would then they did the blood test. Obviously I don't know what blood test they did at that point apart from cholesterol, but they would have looked at those and gone, well, there's nothing unhealthy here, so we just need to stimulate ovulation to happen.
Yeah, and I remember, actually, I don't know if I've told you, but I went and had a couple of scans. One time they said, oh, you've got PCOS.
Yep.
Classic, yeah. But then the next time I went, they were like, oh no, you don't have PCOS. So I'm thinking, okay, what am I?
I'm going to jump in here because a lot of you have been asking me about this anyway, and this is a great place to sort of explain to people. If you have people who are amenorrheic, or even if they, you know, are a little bit irregular with their menstrual cycle, they often do an ultrasound because it's what we do to check what's going on. And you will always see multiple follicles and which look like little cysts on the screen. And so if you've got somebody who maybe doesn't understand low energy availability, RED-S, which is, you know, a lot of people, because it's not technically a clinical condition as such yet, people are not always aware of it, they may jump to conclusions because they'll go, she hasn't got a period, oh, and we can see multiple follicles on the screen, so she must have PCOS. Now that is not accurate diagnosis for PCOS. So for PCOS, if you look at the Endocrine Society guidelines, they need to look at several things. You need to look at hormonal levels, and the biggest sign would be that testosterone would be high. So the majority of women that come to me who say, I've been told I've got PCOS, usually when you look at their blood, you're like, you definitely have not got PCOS, because that's the biggest sign, is that testosterone would be high. And in most of the cases that we see, well, in all the cases we see, testosterone's really low, estrogen's really low, luteinizing hormones really low, follicle stimulating hormones really low. So actually that's hypothalamic amenorrhea, not PCOS. The other symptoms that you may notice are that some people get really bad acne, and potentially extra hair around their, you know, on their face, like facial hair and stuff. And then also, if they do the ultrasound, sometimes they'll look at the lining of the uterus, and that will also give them an indicator. So you cannot make a diagnosis just from they don't have periods and they've got multiple follicles, because that is not PCOS. So I want women out there who've been told they've got PCOS to really question that, so that they're aware, and actually ask the person who's told them, have you done this via the Endocrine Society guidelines? Because, you know, I want to know what my blood tests are, for example. Don't just accept it, I think, is what I'd say.
Yeah. Well, I think that's so good that you know, I wasn't lucky enough to know you back then, and so I didn't know to ask all these questions. So Chris and I really were doing it blind, and we just were doing our own research. You know, it wasn't, I don't want to give, you know, the professionals I saw a bad name, but I just think they just weren't looking at all the pieces of the puzzle, and maybe they've got to know so much that they can't know things in detail.
No, and I think that's a really, I think that's a really important point to make. Like, I don't know everything about every aspect of nutrition, so I wouldn't be able to give advice on it. And if people ask me, I say, sorry, that's not my area of expertise, and I don't choose it to be. But I do think this whole area of amenorrhea is not widely understood, and how to treat it, and what you should be looking for. And I don't think always the valid questions are asked, because at any point, Polly, did anybody ask you about your training load through any of this?
No, I mean, I think it always came up that I was training, but it was never they never delved into it. So they never asked how many hours, what intensity, you know. And even though I wasn't training professionally anymore, I was still doing a lot, you know, and probably restricting more by that time.
Yeah. And I guess that's it. Like, you know, for me, these are the key questions that people should be asking. And just so that you guys are aware, I think we've discussed this before, but the high cholesterol is very, very common, again, in women with amenorrhea, because usually estrogen protects us from a high cholesterol. So basically, estrogen protects women in producing intrinsic cholesterol. So as soon as you don't have enough estrogen, cholesterol in numbers do go up, which is one of the reasons we don't test cholesterol in amenorrheic women, because just like you, they'll go, oh my goodness, I must be doing something wrong. I'll cut back even further.
Yeah.
And in fact, I wrote about this in Orthorexia because I had a case study, a young woman who exactly that. She came to me saying, well, I had an MOT at work and they did my cholesterol and it's really high. And this girl was not really eating anything other than fruits and vegetables. So there was no reason why her cholesterol would be high, apart from the fact that she'd been amenorrheic for 5 years.
Yeah.
Which nobody had bothered to question her on. So there is a reason why people's cholesterol tends to go up if you are amenorrheic.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were on Clomid to stimulate ovulation. That didn't really do very much.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did have a period, but I don't. Obviously, it was kind of a forced one via that. So, but to be honest, whether I did or not, I still hadn't addressed the problem. You know, I was kind of scraping over the surface, thinking, oh yeah, I'll do this. I'll go and see this specialist, go and see this person. But really, I wasn't getting deep enough into what I actually needed to do. So
when did the penny drop for you? Like, when did you suddenly go, do you know what?
I think it was 2007. So we came back to the UK the end of 2017. I think I had just read a article by Tina Muir.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's how you say her name.
Yeah, I think that's how I say it.
So. Yeah. So I think she was a British runner, wasn't she? Marathon runner, who had been through similar. And I reached out to her and messaged her because it was the first thing that resonated with me. And I said, thank you for sharing your story. Have you got any advice? And she said, if you do anything, make sure you read Nicola Rinaldi's book, No Period Now What? And I was like, oh, okay, thank you, kind of forgot about it. And, didn't actually get that book until another year later. By which time we very quickly developed the gym over here. We got back in December and we were open at the beginning of January. It was kind of a sink or swim thing. We came back with the bags on our back, and kind of moved to Bath and just jumped in with both feet, got the gym, and I was feeling really good because I was for the first time feeling really fulfilled with work, and it kind of took my mind off things. But I think coming to a new city, meeting new people, it was still the identity thing. I still wanted to, I was Chris's wife and I had to be seen to be fit, and things they probably didn't care, but I did. So yeah, again, it kind of carried on, and then, but by that time I was pretty low about the whole thing. No one had given me an answer why I wasn't having a period, and I think I'd actually had maybe 2 by that time, but they were maybe 6 months apart, so my body was trying. And looking back, I actually had those periods when I think one was straight after Christmas, and we had just chilled out basically. Eaten well, chilled out, and yeah, my body had kind of switched back on, but I still didn't, the switch didn't completely flick for me there. And then I listened to a couple of podcasts. So it was 2018 then that I got the book. So which is amazing. I don't know if you've written it. But it just,
I know Nicola very well. Like, so Nicola, I know, so Tina, Nicola and I have spoken on several occasions, and Nicola and I have had a number of conversations, and so I know the book because obviously she actually asked me to read the revised copy to check that it was up to kind of scratch in terms of some of the advice she was giving out and things like that. So yeah, it's one approach, I would say.
It's extreme. It's quite extreme, and I know that you in the past have said not everyone needs to do that. Yeah. But for me, so basically it goes on the principles of, stop training and eat more, to keep it to be as simple as possible. And you know what though, I think that was the only way it was going to happen for me.
Yeah.
Because I had to, for 2 or 3 years then, I had still been doing it my way, and I'd been going, okay, maybe, this is enough training, or I am still eating enough, that's fine, but I needed to go all in on something.
Yeah.
And I really did struggle, and I I feel sorry for Chris. What I just used to cry, like, because I was such a goal. I've always been a goal-driven person. I think most of us probably are, who are listening to this. And I had this goal, and I was doing things. So once I'd started eating and completely stopped training, nothing was happening, and I was like, it's not fair. Like, I'm literally giving up everything who I am, and it's still not working. But then, it was just a matter of time then. So
I want you to maybe just talk a little bit about that time a bit more, because I know a few people who'd be listening to this who would say they're exactly where you are, and they are really struggling. And I know because they reach out to me all the time, and all I always say is your numbers are going in the right direction, because obviously we are checking bloods and everything you can see from that. But I have no magic wand to make it happen, and I don't know what the magic number is for each person, because it's slightly different for everybody.
Totally. And can I just say that it is so different for everybody. Like, we've had this conversation before, and I was comparing myself to people who were successfully conceiving and were still training a lot, and still had, and I don't want to pick names because I don't know their underlying story, and they might have had a really rough time as well. But I would compare myself to them and say, well, how come it works for them? It's not, that's not fair. I'm doing exactly the same as them, but everybody is different.
Yeah. And I think don't underestimate the stress the body goes under. Like, you put your body under so much pressure
for so long as well.
Yeah, so many years. And then, as you said, as you came out of that, there was an element of, who am I? I don't know who I am anymore. And that almost caused things to go into even further of a deficit by
absolutely
more.
I was consciously, that's when you asked me earlier about when it was conscious and when it wasn't, that was at the point where it went conscious, because I was like, I've got to keep hold of something.
Yeah. And this is what we see. I mean, I see, in clinic most weeks, right, is exactly that, is that kind of, it's a conversation I had with Chris the other day. It's a really interesting place, in that the number of women that contact me, and also we work together, and we've had really good success rate, like 70% of the women that we have worked with have got their periods back, right? So really, really good success rate. But some people, it takes a lot longer. And also some people are really impatient. I think the thing about this process is understand that, most of us are goal oriented, but we're also very highly productive women. We're women that like stuff done quickly, on our time frame. But you cannot rush your body. No. And so, when people, I've had some people go, I've been following your advice for 2 months and nothing's happened. I'm like, it's not going to happen in 2 months. You haven't had a period for 8 years. 2 months is not going to do it. Like, I think you have to be realistic, but also the time it will happen is when your body feels absolutely no threat anymore, whether that's threat of starvation or the stress of training, but only at that point. And for some women, that may be an uncomfortable place to be in terms of physically where they are.
Incredibly uncomfortable. I think the thing that I really want to say, the thing that kind of got me through that time, is talking to people about it and letting people know where I'm at.
Yeah.
You know, don't be embarrassed about it. Like, you know, I'd never spoken to, you know, my parents about, you know, my period before or things like that. But I had to let them know so that they understood, and everyone was so supportive. Like, you know, you think, oh, everyone's going to judge you, but once they know, and the weight that is lifted when you feel like people understand what you're going through, they might not fully understand it, but they know, you know, what you're trying to achieve, kind of thing. And it's just talk about it. Like, it's don't be afraid to talk about it.
And I think what's really interesting for me with you is that obviously I didn't know you guys.
No.
I mean, I'd heard of you, but I didn't know you guys. And likewise, you'd heard of me, but didn't know me. And so I didn't know your story. So when you sort of reached out and said, can we have a coffee? Can we have a chat? And I was like, yeah, I'd love to get to know you better. I'm going to be working with you. It's all good. It's all good. I when I first met you, I just thought, yeah, she looks fit. Like, because in my head, that's who you were. And yet it's interesting that one of the first things you said to me is, I feel really uncomfortable in my body at the moment because I've been doing everything and I'm still waiting and nothing's happening. And I know we had a conversation about, should you be doing tennis or something, I think was discussed, and how you should manage that and things like that. But it's, again, what I'm trying to say to you is your perception of yourself is often what holds you back, because I appreciate you have been a very different body type previously. And so it must feel like, it's just like recovering from an eating disorder. It feels like you have no control over your body and it's doing what it wants to do. And what I always try and say to people is that your body knows exactly where it wants to be fertile.
Yeah. And
so it will have to get to that point. And that is really individual, and it's based on genetics, and it's based on, you know, the length of time you've had problems and all that kind of stuff. And so I think, like, again, it's your perception of you that's the issue. I mean, we had an exchange of photos earlier this week of like, I think I sent you my photo, which was exactly 10 years ago this weekend, actually. And I look like I'm about 12.
You do.
I remember standing, having that photo taken, feeling really uncomfortable in my body, like looking at all the other people around me who looked really, really like fit, and I didn't feel that.
Because you look in the photo like you look uncomfortable, you know, like you look like you're kind of, come on, take the photo, hurry up.
Yeah, well, I hate having my photo taken, as we know anyway. But yeah, it's interesting looking back on that, thinking I saw myself as so different, and yet and that's the, you know, it's the thing, I've always been a small build. It's just how you perceive yourself, and then that's how you experience yourself, right? So in my eyes, when I first met you, I was really confused. I was like, what's she talking about? She looks great. And yet I understand why you were feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then we got good news.
Yeah, so I think it was, so I went all in, as in I stopped pretty much everything bar walking. And when I was walking, I was just literally walking. I wasn't going for a 3-hour walk. Just ate normal. And so that was in probably May, April time. I'd also started I went for quite a few sessions of acupuncture, and acupuncture actually, going back very briefly, I had a knee injury many years ago, and no one could solve it. So I did, you know, had an MRI, everything. No one could pinpoint what it was. Went for acupuncture, and ping, you know, was running 2 weeks later kind of thing. And so I've always been open to acupuncture. I went to acupuncture, the local lady, and I don't know whether that helped, as in it was a direct kind of cause and effect, but it let me lie on a couch for 30 minutes a week and just think about my body and what I was doing to it, you know. And she obviously knew what I told her, but it was really, it's, you know, when you speak to someone and you can hear yourself talking and you're like, oh my god, this sounds, I'm answering my own questions. That's what it allowed me to do. So if you can, you know, if you can kind of have that time, that quiet time where you just kind of think about yourself, then yeah, that was amazing. So yeah, I started having that maybe April, May, and then August I had my first period. So in the grand scheme of things, it actually wasn't that long. You know, it'd been a long time since 2015, but as we know, I hadn't completely committed. So from the time when I said, right, I'm going to do this, you know, I'm not going to waver, it was only a few months. And then, yeah, so had a period, and then had, 6 or 7, ranging from 4 weeks to 6 weeks apart. And then, found out we were pregnant the next year.
Yeah.
And now we've got George.
Old, and he's lovely. Is it 5 months? Yeah, he's
almost 5 months. Yeah.
So you know, obviously for you, that's a big journey. And like I said, I know you said right at the beginning, you've only really put the pieces together in recent months. Probably, you know, obviously the stuff that you learned previously, but maybe also, you know, you've been on a lot of our conversations when Chris and I are talking, and you know how we've developed our practice and everything else. So I suppose that it does help, doesn't it, when someone says something, you go, oh yeah, that makes sense, you know, like it makes sense. So I guess one question I have got to ask you is, out of everything you went through, and I think I know the answer, but out of everything you went through, what do you think the best advice you were given during that time was, and who was that from?
I think for me, reading that book was a game changer. But I know it's not the route that everyone has to go down. I don't necessarily know whether it was what one specific person told me. And I always say this, that yes, it took a long time, but I actually am pleased that I've been through this journey. You know, it wouldn't have been right to fall pregnant, you know, as in it wouldn't have been the right time. You know, I really am a believer in everything happens for a reason. It happens at the right time. You know, if we had got back from Australia, we just started a business, just moved into a flat, it was, you know, if I got pregnant there, the business wouldn't be where it's at now, because I wouldn't have, you know, been able to be involved so much. So I really have no regrets about, or I don't wish that it had gone any quicker. Because I don't think this is answering your question, sorry, I'm waffling, but I do think that having to go through this journey and work it out ourselves has possibly meant that maybe I won't be tempted to go back to where I was in the future.
So that was my next kind of question, is obviously, you know, I know that Chris, you and I have discussed like a return to play type program, and obviously we've got a bit more time to play with at the moment because of lockdown and everything else, but obviously you do go back to some sort of structured training, which I completely understand. How do you feel about that? Like, are you feeling confident about managing that, or do you feel quite nervous about managing that?
I'm almost I think would say I'm being overcautious.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not, I'm so like, I do not want to be there again. And it's hard at the moment because I'm exclusively breastfeeding. So you know, I probably won't have a period until I wean George. So that marker of my health now is probably a bit harder to find. So this COVID thing's really kind of shaken things for everybody. But I was due to have a kind of pelvic health physio appointment before this all locked down. That was obviously cancelled, so I'm waiting for that just to make sure that I'm properly healed, because it was an interesting birth. George didn't really want to come out, so physically I want to make sure that I'm all healed. I'm really excited about getting back to something, because I got to the point before him that I was completely over everything. I wasn't actually enjoying running for the first time in my life, and now I'm kind of itching to run, which is a good sign, I guess. And you say that structured training, but to be honest, I'm not in any hurry to be in any structured training. I want to do what makes me feel good. Like at the moment, I'm doing 30 minutes of strength training, a variety of strength training during every week, and that's one because it's mentally my time, if George will let me. Sometimes I have to use him as a weight, but also I just feel good with it, and I feel strong, and I've got to support another human now, so I'm nutrition, I just eat whatever kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's, and you said it a couple of times, like you said it when you had a different focus, like the business came focus, and now you're a mother, which is another focus. And I can definitely, I mean, I'm not saying that everybody should go away and have babies and that's how it change, but I can definitely relate to that in that, I mean, I fell pregnant very, very quickly, and probably younger than I anticipated. But that's not to say that I didn't want them. I just hadn't really.
Two wonderful girls there.
They are great, and I would never have my life any other way. But I was much younger than I'd ever thought I would be before kids, to certain reasons in terms of eating disorders and periods and everything else. But you do gain a different perspective on life. Like for me, when the girls came along, I was very career orientated, very, very career orientated. I mean, nothing's really changed there, as we know, but I was very career orientated in my mid-20s, and that was my focus. And then I fell pregnant, and I had Maya, who I mean, I loved I loved when she was like, baby. I loved it. I loved becoming a mum, to be fair. I took to it fairly naturally, even though it was hard and like you have no idea what you're doing, but I took to it fairly naturally. And I think because I've never been someone who, when it comes to kids, I've never needed a guidebook. I've never needed to get it right. I've just kind of gone with it. I've been quite fluid with it. And then Ella came along, and it was like, right, okay, I can't really do this work thing. I can't really stretch myself between small children and my career. And although I carried on working, it was more from like my sanity point of view than it was anything else. And then again, like with the running came when Ella was like you, I exclusively breastfed both my girls. So I breastfed Maya, and actually pretty much as soon as I stopped breastfeeding Maya, I fell pregnant with Ella. So I didn't really get into any sort of training until Ella was about 11 months, and she was starting to drink a lot less, and that's when I got my period. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to just try running at that point. So I suppose like you, it was one of those things that I hadn't really consciously thought about doing, but I knew I'd got to a point where I actually want to do something for me now. I want to move my body. I want to feel stronger. I want to feel more capable of running around after a 2-year-old at that point as well. So, so yeah, I think like it's good.
Priorities change completely.
100%. And it's something, what I would say is, which is really great, and you've said this already, is some people, and I would say some people, like if you have a very fixed mindset, you may not always learn from your experiences. I would say you and I both have a very growth mindset. So we use our previous experiences to continue to become aware, So you know that you will never go down that road again, because as soon as you notice that the balance is a bit off, you'll pull back, or you'll change it up. And I guess I've always been the same. I've always been like that. I've been, and since I've had the girls, I've had a regular period every single month. And my training goes up and down. And at the moment I'm doing fairly decent amount of training, but don't really know why, because I've got nothing to train for. But
congratulations.
It's, to be honest, it's more that we're just maintaining, we're just ticking over. And I was at a good place before the lockdown because I was going to go to Nepal, so I didn't want to lose all that because I built that up. And so we're just ticking over. So I've had some down weeks to adapt, and then we've built up again. And then this week for me is an adaptation week again, and then we'll build up again. And it's just how I tend to, my body functions. But my period is still very regular, and I think that's the thing I want people to know. I think people have this really skewed mindset that you can't have a strong physical body and train hard and have a period, and yet you can, because there's lots of us that are doing that, and it's completely possible. And so for you, Polly, I know that you will also get what you want, but I think it's really sensible to make sure that you are physically ready.
Well, I think I don't want to jump in too soon that I do more damage that I really can't get back from, so I'm and George is keeping me more than busy.
Yes, exactly.
how much a 4-month-old can consume your time, it's a completely different thing.
And that's it, like it never stops being challenging, it just changes.
Oh, totally.
Okay, well, like my last question for you then is, if you could give one piece of advice to anybody who's listening, who is going through what you have been through, what would be your piece of advice for them?
Talk to people. Let them know what you're doing, let them know what you want to do. Just as I said, it's such a weight that was lifted, when I could talk to friends about it. They just, I don't want, you don't want loads of pity or sympathy, or and not everybody on listening to this will want to get pregnant, they'll but just let them know what your goal is so that they can support you to it. And some people not meaning to might be almost preventing you from getting there, from comments they make, or things that topics of conversation, and if they know, okay, let's just steer away from that for a bit, then just it's such a lonely feeling otherwise. Like I know that the times that I were at my lowest was when I wasn't talking to anyone about it, and poor Chris didn't know what to do. He was there, and he was helpless. He couldn't, he wanted it, George, as much as I did. He was probably broody for a lot longer than I was, but it was out of his hands, and he felt, so I think talking to him, but then talking to other people and sharing the load is so important. So that's pretty much it, I think. And it will happen. Just have confidence. And I think I was speaking to somebody the other day and said, just change. We're all very goal driven, like no doubt about it. Whoever's listening to this is probably, you've got your sights set on a goal and you want to achieve it, and just change that goal. Like my goal was then, a couple of years ago, it was, okay, my only goal was getting my period back. Then my only goal is knowing I'm ovulating. Then my only goal is having a baby, and obviously, you need to have a balance. It's not healthy to completely focus on it, but just change your mindset, as easy as that sounds. It's not, I know.
But I think it's really good advice there. So, I mean, Polly, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And we've loved having you. it's quite weird doing this solo, but
You missed Chris already.
yeah, how weird is that?
They haven't been interrupted, so hopefully they're okay.
I'm
He
sure
likes
they're
his walks with George, so.
but thank you so much, and we're going to have you back on. I think the whole idea is that we'll get you back on intermittently, so that
Yeah, absolutely.
How you're getting on and how you'll return to sport.
Yeah, and if anyone's got any questions, like, you know, maybe we could do a discussion one. I'm you know,
absolutely. I think maybe in a couple of weeks' time we'll probably do another live, and if we can get you in on the live as well. And I know there are lots of people who'd be desperate to ask you questions, so
sure.
so yeah, that'd be really great. So that's it for this week, guys. If you have any feedback or any questions, please let us know. Please continue to review us as well, because it's always nice to hear what you guys think. And we will be back next week with another episode.
Thanks, Rini.
No worries.